So here I have all of the items you'll need to complete this termination. First thing I do want to talk about is the actual termination itself. Here it is here, and this was first designed at the Woods Hole Oceanographic and fabricated. We found it as old as 1984 when they were receiving orders to put it into our stockroom. So it's been around a long time, works really, really well. The only change I've seen is that now the hole for the conductor, the center, what am I trying to say, center tube with the conductors doesn't have to be forced through a hole. Now they've cut it out. So it's much easier to have this, when you push it, you have to pull this in, and then that cable can come right out there. You don't have to force it through. It can be really difficult in the past. You can see that they'd have to pull this through, and that can really do a damage on those, on that wire, on the inner core of that. So they've taken that away. So you have there, and then now it's been cut out. So much easier. That's really the only difference that has happened in that amount of time. Going onward. So now we are going to terminate this. I'm going to use the termination and slide that down the cable, and that can just go right down at the bottom. Taking a piece of neoprene, I like to wrap that around the cable. It won't hurt the cable then when you're using the vise. To me, a vise is the only way to go on this. From there, I'm going to measure 7 inches down from the cut edge, and I'll explain my measurements in just a minute. What we're always watching for, first of all, let me show you what we're going to be doing. This kind of can explain it a little bit. We're creating a bird cage termination. This is a 2-layer cable, and so the inner and the outer layers of this cable have been pulled back and then secured, and then you just see the inner core here. So that's what we're going to be creating. It does need to be pulled down inside of this termination. Now this termination on the inside is only just a little bit more than 4 inches. 4 inches. So you've really got to be aware of how long you're making that first bird cage. I like the first one to be between 2 and 2.5 inches, and then you secure it, and then the second one about 1 inch down. That still leaves almost 1 inch. So if something happens, I like to have it as low profile, the bird cage, as possible, so it can fit into this opening easily. And I'll show you how that's done a little bit later. So the first thing we're going to do after we've measured down 7 inches is we're going to put some seizing wire on there, and that's just going to, that stops everything from moving, and it's the first step to the terminating. And I just wind this around 3 or 4 times. There you go. And I want to do it tight so it doesn't slide up and down the cable. And then after I've twisted it around about 5 or 6 times, I cut it off so you've got about 1/2 inch there, and then I just bend that right around so it's not sticking out when you're pulling this down into the termination. So we're moving along. We're going to start with the outer layer. We're going to just take each wire one at a time and unwind it. Once you've unwound it, so it's all the way at the bottom, we don't want to bend. We want to lean it, pull it, no bending. You do not want any kind of a bent wire there. This is going to be the weakest point of your termination. If you end up bending this, it will fail. So we don't want to do that. We do, however, want to bend it over enough so when we're pulling all of the wires down to create the first bird cage, it can do that easily. Let me keep going, and once you see several of them done together, it kind of comes together, and you can see how that works. This takes a while, as you can see. One thing I have learned about terminating wire and different wire, this is just 322 I'm talking about. So brand new 322 that's just come from the manufacturer, and rusty used 322 cable like this one right here are completely different cables to terminate. You do it the same way, but they react so differently. It's actually easier to terminate a cable that has been used. It doesn't have as much a memory from when it was first wound. And when it comes from the manufacturer, it's also been lubricated, which makes it even more difficult to terminate. So my favorite is definitely when you get the old rusty wire and it looks like it wouldn't do anything, it wouldn't be able to hold anything, and it tests beautifully, and it surpasses what you even expect. So you just never know, and you certainly can't trust by how it looks, because the cables and the wires are left outside a lot of the time, and they're exposed to the elements, and so you just can't trust of how it looks, because it can be still a very good tension member. Now, probably the biggest difference between the wire pool terminating 322 and a vessel is that we have a sandblaster here. So we have the opportunity to sandblast the cable and really get it cleaned up. It removes all of the dirt, old lubrication, grease, and it's just, I think, a much better way, obviously, to terminate, because then when you're pouring the Cerrobend into the termination, I believe that it adheres better to it. So it works a little bit better that way. The vessels don't have the opportunity. They don't have a sandblaster, so they have to, by hand, and I'll show you, depending on what the condition is of the wire. If it's very oily, sticky, has a lot of lubrication on it, it needs a degreaser. Yep, that's electromotive. I think it's a great degreaser. Wipe each strand one at a time. And that takes a lot of time, but it's so important to do this, because if each strand is not cleaned well enough, the termination can fail, and then you've lost a package, you've lost everything. So it really is worth taking the time. The other way to clean, or how to clean rusty cable, is with sandpaper. So again, same thing, one at a time, and you just have to rub some sandpaper up and down each piece of wire. Takes a while. So this can be a long, tedious process, but I think one that is so important on the vessel, because then you can ensure that you're always going to have a good termination. Luckily, I don't have to do that as much, so we do use a sandblaster, and that can remove everything, which I'll show you in some time coming up. So now that we've got the first layer of our cable all broomed out, we're going to bring that down. And I had talked before about how we only have 4 inches inside that termination. So I want to always be aware how much we're using. So I'm going to take my pen and mark 2 inches down. And that's where I want to fasten the first layer. With a hose clamp or a zip tie, I find zip ties a little bit easier. And what I'm going to do is I'm just pulling it down, trying not to bend the wire. Again, most important thing not to do. And I am pulling it, yeah, not very well though, down. What I'm going to do is hold that with one hand. So ultimately what I'm looking for is that I want to have all the wires evenly distributed around. So the Cerrobend can get inside in and around all of the wires. Doesn't always happen that easy, obviously. As I said, wire does have a mind of its own. So it is going to do what it wants and not necessarily what you want. I am attaching this. The zip tie is now in place and it's holding the cable. What I'm going to do then is put a seizing right above at my 2-inch mark. Now, if you don't do the zip tie enough, it can pop out. So once I have that all secured with the zip tie, I'm going to bring my seizing around, and that is going to secure it somewhat more than what the zip tie had done. And I'm just going to wrap that around. And I can cut the zip tie off. I'm going to just wrap again like I did with the first seizing, about 5 or 6 times. Cut off the end so you have about 3/4 of an inch there. Wrap that around. And then I can cut off the zip tie. And I have our first bird cage done. What I want to do is trim the edges about 3/4 of an inch from the seizing. You don't want to make them too short because if it does get pulled slightly when it's being sandblasted, then they'll flip right out and they won't be held. So you want to do them long enough, I think about 3/4 of an inch. And this is just about 2 inches down, so we still have room for our second bird cage. Now I'm just going to be trimming all the way around. And trimming these makes it so it fits inside the termination better. You don't need all of this wire. All right, that's all complete. So now we truly have completed the first outer layer of our 322 cable. We've done our first bird cage. Now I'm going to do the same thing, but with the second layer, inner layer, and I'm just going to unwind every strand as I did in the first one. And I want to pull them down over the first bird cage, again, not bending it. So the most important thing is to make sure that every piece of wire has been unwound. Again, the goal is to get the Cerrobend in and through all of these wires so it'll hold inside the termination. Once we have the last of the wire unwound, broomed out from the inner layer, we're going to have a marker tape. And I'm going to go through with the marker tape. There's 2 bits of information on this marker tape that we use. And I want to explain those to you. So a marker tape is inside our 322, and it's usually a yellow little piece of tape, but it can also be clear white. 2 bits of information we're going to get on these markers. One is a marker tape, and that's the most important thing. That tells us where this sample was taken on the reel. So when we get a full reel of 322 with the wire pool, that's 10,000 meters. These are read in meters, and so it can tell us how close it is to the core or to the working end. The other bit of information on these tags are more information for the wire pool, but it's very helpful for us. Two things. One could be just a part number, which Rochester, it's a number that they have designated for our 322, which is A301592. Sometimes it will say, instead of the part number that Rochester assigns the cable, it will have an order number, and that will start with a Q, and it's a 4-digit number. So you see that one, Q9499. So that is a number that was assigned just to this cable. It was assigned to this cable by the company, but it's only for this particular reel. So another reel would have another Q number. So once we have the tape number, they're important bits of information. We use it to know where the vessel is on the reel, so that's important information. We document that in our UNOLS database. But also I know that the vessel will look at the core marker and compare that to the wet end marker. So it's used in a couple of different ways, very important information. All right, so our next step is to bring down the outer layer of wires over the first bird cage. So we're going to create. All right, so our next step is to bring down the outer layer of wires over the first bird cage. So we're going to create the second bird cage, and we're just going to bend them, lean them over, no bending, leaning them over the first bird cage. So now you'll have your second. You want to bring it in as close as to the first as you can. We're trying not to make this a very big profile around the top, because it does need to fit into this termination that only has so much room. So we always are thinking about that. Once I've got this held, I'm going to take a zip tie again, do the same thing as I did the first time, bring it around. Now I haven't measured like I did the first time. The first time I measured 2 inches down from our first seizing down. But where I'm going to put this zip tie is just right underneath, right below the seizing of the outer layer. So that's going to go right down below that, and then the wire, my seizing wire to hold the inner bird cage, can go right below that first seizing. So now once I have that secured with the zip tie, I'm going to bring the seizing around and tighten it. So that'll be tighter, not as tight as I want. And again, just wrap that around itself 5 or 6 times. And once I've secured that, I will release the zip tie. Now we've got all of the ends trimmed. The bird cage termination is done. I'm going to cut off the top, the inner core, because that we do not need for our purposes. This is just for the wire pool. So now, once we've sandblasted all of this, we're going to pull this right inside here, and then we'll be able to break it. So next is sandblasting. Just takes off all sand, rust, dirt, you name it. Okay, I think that's done. Out it comes. So once it has been sandblasted, I do need to make sure that all of that grit is gone. And to do that, this is the way to do it. I also want to, after I've sanded it, I just want to make sure, put a little degreaser on it. Anything that didn't come off can come off now. Give it a little air. And it's ready to go. And we go. It goes right inside there. And then we're going to attach it to the vise. There's a little trick I've learned along the way. First of all, vise is the only way to do it, but also, if you have the other end terminated, it makes it so much easier to pull. So now we have pulled the termination inside, the bird cage inside of our termination. I do need to seal the end with plasducts, or monkey dung as we call it, right here. And also, if you do have one of the terminations that is not cut out, you need to block the hole, just so the Cerrobend does not come out. So that's what I'm going to do now. I just roll out some Cerrobend, and then I just roll it around the bottom of the cable so it is right at the opening, and so hopefully none of the Cerrobend will come out. Once I've wrapped it around 2 or 3 times, and I'm just squeezing it to the cable, kind of pinching the edge so none of it's going to leak out. All right, so what I've done is I have sealed the bottom by putting enough monkey dung, or what we call plasducts. Here it is right here, in case they're duck seal compound. Fully sealing it so none of the Cerrobend will stay right inside of the termination and not leak through. I'm going to use my vise just to hold that right up there like that, and it's ready to pour. So the next step is to heat up the Cerrobend. And so this is what I get, Cerrobend alloy, and I get it in a puck like this. But after we use it, you can reuse it. I will pour it into the termination and break the wire. Once I have a bunch of terminations to clean out, I put them all in this pail upside down, so the Cerrobend is going to come right out. Great thing about Cerrobend is that it's a low heat alloy, so it doesn't need to be much more, I don't know, 120 to 140 degrees, and a couple of hours and I've got these all cleaned out, so that's terrific. Once I've cleaned all this out, it's all come out. Once I've taken out the terminations and cleaned out the inside, I save the extra Cerrobend and we'll pour it into a muffin pan actually. And then once it hardens, you've got that. So this is just from the manufacturer, and then this is used. So you can reuse this over and over. It's terrific. Doesn't take too long. Just give it a couple of minutes. It does take a little bit. Just wait for a couple seconds and it'll... No fumes from this at all. It's approved by the safety office. Several people use it at the oceanographic. They just want to make sure that I'm not throwing it in the trash because there is lead in it. So as long as I have it in the safety container, it's fine. But there are no fumes at all associated with it, which is great. Okay, so we have our Cerrobend, and it has, it's all warmed up and heated in our little coffee pot. As I said, it doesn't take a high heat to melt this, which is great, and it works very quickly. So before we have this, we pour this, the only thing I want to do now is just to heat up the Termination. So when I'm pouring the hot Cerrobend into the Termination, it's hopefully similar temperature. So I'm going to just use the heat gun and warm it up. All right, you got it. Now we can pour the Cerrobend right in. I usually let it sit a couple of hours. This can be used same day, so you don't have to wait. I use a funnel, a little bit more efficient. All right, let's come to the top. Once you have that, the only thing I do is want to get rid of a few air bubbles, possibly. This always makes me thirsty. Okay, and that's it. About a couple hours and you can pull it. That is it.